I legally and permanently blocked my HOA president's driveway, and she can't do a single thing about it. Most people fantasize about getting one over on a tyrannical HOA board member, a little victory lap that puts them in their place for a day or two. My victory wasn't little, it wasn't for a day. It's forever. It's etched into the very land deeds of our subdivision, a permanent monument to her own arrogance. You see, when Brenda decided to make my life a living hell before I'd even spent a single night in my new house, she made one catastrophic miscalculation. She assumed I was just some random guy, another faceless homeowner she could bully with bylaws and fines. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that my entire professional life, my entire career for the last 15 years, has been about one thing: understanding exactly where one person's property ends and another's begins. My name is Alex, and I'm a professional land surveyor and civil engineer. My job is to deal with inches, with arcane legal descriptions, with 100-year-old maps and satellite data. I find the truth hidden in the dirt and on paper. And when Brenda came at me, I did what I do best. I found the truth, and the truth, as it turned out, was a 3-foot-wide strip of pure, unadulterated justice. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about how bullies, in their desperate need for control, often hand you the very weapon you need to defeat them. It started, as these things often do, with something incredibly minor. I had just closed on my first home, a modest but beautiful house in a manicured suburban neighborhood. It was the culmination of years of saving and dreaming. My official move-in date, as per the HOA's welcoming packet, was Friday, June 1st. But the moving company, a national chain with its own rigid logistics, had an opening. They could move me on Thursday, May 31st, in the late afternoon, or I'd have to wait another 2 weeks. It was a no-brainer. I called the HOA management company, left a voicemail explaining the situation, and figured a 12-hour head start wouldn't be a declaration of war. I was wrong. The truck had barely backed into my driveway when she appeared. A woman with a haircut you could set your watch to, and an expression that suggested she'd just smelled burning garbage. She marched across her perfect lawn, clipboard in hand. "You're not supposed to be here until tomorrow," she announced. No introduction, no welcome. I now know this was Brenda, the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. That first interaction set the stage for everything. The dismissive tone, the immediate assumption of authority, the sheer audacity. She didn't see a new neighbor eager to join the community. She saw a rule breaker who needed to be crushed on principle. What she should have been asking herself wasn't whether I was a day early, but who exactly she was about to provoke. Have you ever dealt with someone who was so drunk on their tiny sliver of power that they couldn't see the cliff they were gleefully marching towards? Stick around, because I'm about to tell you how I didn't just show Brenda the cliff. I meticulously surveyed it, mapped it out, and then let her own momentum do the rest. The story of how my planter boxes became a permanent, immovable legal fixture is a masterclass in bureaucratic warfare. And I have to admit, I enjoyed every single minute of it. The arrival of the police was, I suppose, meant to be the climax of Brenda's power play. For her, it was the ultimate flex, summoning armed agents of the state to enforce her will upon a lowly peon who dared to unload his U-Haul a few hours ahead of schedule. 2 officers, a veteran with a weary face and a younger, more rigid-looking partner, pulled up to the curb, their flashing lights painting the suburban twilight in garish strokes of red and blue. Neighbors peeked through their blinds, the curtain-twitching telegraph of community drama. Brenda stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing an expression of profound vindication. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "That's him, officer," she declared, her voice ringing with the melodrama of a B-movie actress. "He's trespassing. He has illegally occupied this residence before the authorized date." I watched the veteran officer, Sergeant Miller, as he took in the scene. The half-unloaded moving truck, the boxes of kitchen supplies on the lawn, my exhausted posture, and Brenda's righteous indignation. I could see a flicker of profound annoyance in his eyes, the look of a man who deals with real problems for a living and was now adjudicating a turf war over a calendar date. He approached me, his voice calm and level. "Sir, can I see your ID and any documentation you have for this property?" I nodded, relieved to finally be dealing with a rational adult. I handed him my driver's license and the thick folder of closing documents I just picked up from the lawyer's office that morning. "My name is Alex Sterling," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I close on this house at 10 a.m. today. Here's the signed deed, the title, the whole package. I'm the legal owner." Sergeant Miller took the folder and methodically paged through it, his flashlight beam cutting through the dusk. He was thorough, which I appreciated. He was verifying legal ownership, the only thing that actually mattered. After a minute, he looked up, first at me, then at Brenda. "Ma'am," he said, his voice laced with carefully controlled patience, "this man is the legal owner of this property. He has every right to be here and to move his belongings." In Brenda's face contorted. "But the HOA rules. The rules state Friday. He's in violation." The officer sighed, a sound that carried the weight of 1,000 petty disputes. "Ma'am, the HOA is a civil organization. Its rules are a civil matter. This is not a criminal trespass. He owns the house. We can't remove him from his own property. This is not a police issue." I decided to try and de-escalate. This was my new home, after all. I didn't want to start a war. "Ma'am," I said, turning to Brenda with what I hoped was a conciliatory smile. "My apologies for the confusion. The moving company had a scheduling conflict. I did leave a message with the management company to let them know. I'm really sorry for any inconvenience." Her face hardened into a mask of pure defiance. Inconvenience wasn't the point. Unquestioning obedience was the point. "A voicemail is not approval," she sniffed. "This is an official violation." She then did something that truly baffled me. She pulled a pre-printed violation slip from her clipboard, scribbled on it with a pen, and thrust it at me. "Here," she snapped. "Your first fine, $100 for unauthorized early occupancy. And I'm documenting your flagrant disregard for the rules. There will be further consequences." The two officers exchanged a look of sheer disbelief. Sergeant Miller handed my folder back, tipped his cap, and said, "Folks, we're leaving. Please try to sort this out like neighbors." They got in their car and drove away, leaving me standing in my new driveway under Brenda's hateful glare, a ridiculous piece of paper in my hand. The fine wasn't the issue. It was the principle. It was the aggression, the complete unwillingness to be reasonable. She had escalated a non-issue into a police matter, and when that failed, she simply invented her own authority on the spot. I looked at the violation notice, then at her smug face, and I felt a switch flip inside me. The desire for a peaceful new start was being replaced by a cold, methodical anger. Fine. She wanted to play by the rules. I would play by the rules. But I would use the real rules, the ones written in county record books and surveyor's ink, not the petty regulations she wielded like a scepter. As I walked into my half-empty house that night, the battle lines had been drawn. She just didn't realize she was bringing a clipboard to a war of maps and deeds. The next morning, I woke up on an air mattress surrounded by boxes, the anger from the previous night having cooled into a hard, dense resolve. Brenda's little power trip wasn't just a one-off annoyance. It was a clear statement of intent. She was going to be a problem, a constant, nagging source of stress in the one place I was supposed to feel safe and at peace. Fighting her with HOA appeals and board meetings would be a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 paper cuts. That wasn't my style. My work is precise, based on immutable facts and legal precedent. I don't argue, I demonstrate. I don't debate feelings, I present evidence. I decided to approach this problem not as a disgruntled homeowner, but as a professional surveyor. I would conduct a full investigation, just as I would for any major commercial or municipal project. The first step was reconnaissance. I spent the weekend unpacking, but my focus was entirely on Brenda. I watched her routine, the way she patrolled the neighborhood in her golf cart, peering at lawns and mailboxes, the way she spoke to the landscapers, pointing and directing with an air of absolute authority. She was a woman who thrived on control. My second step was to gather all the relevant documentation. This was my wheelhouse. I went online to the county's public records portal. For a small fee, I downloaded the official subdivision plat map, the master document created by the original developers in the late 1980s that legally defined every lot, road, and easement in the neighborhood. I also downloaded the full covenants, conditions, and restrictions CC and RS for our homeowners association. I printed everything out, spreading the large map across my new dining room table and grabbing a set of highlighters. Most people find these documents impenetrably boring. To me, they're like a language I'm fluent in. I read through the HOA bylaws first, highlighting every clause related to property modifications, landscaping, fences, and driveways. The rules were, as expected, incredibly strict about sheds, additions, and fence heights, but interestingly vague on ornamental landscaping and garden features. That was a detail I filed away for later. Then, I turned my attention to the plat map. It was a standard survey map showing property lines, building setback lines, and utility easements. I scanned my own lot, then Brenda's lot next door. I used the county's GIS, Geographic Information System, overlay on my computer to compare the digital property lines with the old scan map. I zoomed in, toggling the layers back and forth. And that's when I saw it. It was tiny, almost imperceptible to a layperson. A faint misalignment. On the old plat map, the line defining the edge of the public road's right-of-way, the area dedicated to the city for the street, sidewalk, and utilities, seemed to be drawn a few feet further back from the curve than on the modern GIS map. The GIS map, which is what the city uses for its daily operations, showed the property line right at the back of the sidewalk. The original, legally binding plat map showed it about 3 feet behind that. This kind of discrepancy is not uncommon. Old surveys were done with different equipment, and sometimes mistakes were made when digitizing old paper maps into a modern GIS. But in 99% of cases, the original filed plat map is the legally controlling document. The GIS is just a convenient, but not legally binding, reference. A knot of professional curiosity tightened in my gut. Was it a digitizing error? Or was the original survey itself flawed? There was a subtle but crucial difference. I looked at Brenda's property. Her driveway ran right across this questionable area, connecting her garage to the asphalt of the street. Everyone assumed the little strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street was public property. But what if it wasn't? What if, due to a surveyor's mistake nearly 40 years ago, that little strip of land in front of her house, and mine, was never properly dedicated to the public? I felt a jolt, a thrill of possibility. It was a long shot, a 1 in a million technicality. But Brenda had declared war based on her rulebook. It was time to see what mine had to say. The investigation had just begun, but I had a lead, a single, frayed thread of legal and geographical ambiguity. And I was going to pull on it until the whole tapestry of her authority unraveled. The following Saturday, I woke up before dawn. The sky was a pale, pre-dawn gray, and the neighborhood was silent. This was the perfect time. I didn't want an audience for this next phase. I went to my truck and began unloading my professional equipment. To any curious onlookers, it might have looked like a bizarre assortment of tripods and electronic gadgets. To me, it was the arsenal of truth. I had my RTK GPS rover and base station, a system that provides centimeter-level accuracy by correcting for satellite signal distortion in real time. I also had my robotic total station, a high-precision electronic and optical instrument. This wasn't some hobbyist gear. This was the same equipment used to lay out foundations for skyscrapers and bridges. I started by setting up the GPS base station on a known survey monument I'd located down the street, a brass cap set in the concrete by the county years ago. This gave me a solid, legally defensible starting point. For the next 3 hours, I moved with quiet efficiency. I looked like a man meticulously planning a garden, stopping every few feet to tap a device on a pole into the ground. I wasn't just measuring my property, I was mapping the entire block. I located the exact corners of my lot, referencing the original surveyor's marks I'd found buried under years of dirt and grass. I shot the edge of the asphalt, the curb, the sidewalk, the utility boxes, and most importantly, the precise corners of Brenda's driveway and the front of her house. Each measurement was a digital pinprick on a virtual map I was building on my data collector. The numbers flowed in a stream of coordinates and elevations, cold, hard, and impartial. After I had gathered all the raw data, I packed up my equipment and retreated to the sanctuary of my home office. This was where the real work happened. I uploaded the data from my collector to my computer and imported it into my CAD, computer-aided design software. The points appeared on my screen, a constellation of digital markers representing the physical reality outside. Now, for the moment of truth. I took the scanned image of the original 1987 plat map and georeferenced it, stretching and aligning it to my real-world measurements from the survey monuments. Then, I overlaid my own survey data on top of it. My heart was pounding. I zoomed in on the area in front of Brenda's driveway. And there it was. It wasn't just a hunch. It wasn't a digitizing error. It was real. The original survey had a clear, demonstrable error. There was a sliver of land, a long, thin rectangle, that had been excluded from the public right-of-way dedication. It started at the boundary line between my property and Brenda's, and it ran the entire 50-foot width of my lot frontage. It was exactly 325 feet wide. This strip of land was a remainder parcel, a piece of a larger tract that is left over after the rest has been divided or dedicated. Due to a sloppy legal description in the original documents, this tiny sliver was never deeded to the city. So who owned it? I followed the chain of title in the county records. The original developer had sold the entire parcel, including this forgotten sliver, to the first homeowner of my lot. The ownership of that sliver had been passed down, deed by deed, from owner to owner for 35 years, a silent, invisible appendage to the main property. And now it belonged to me. The realization washed over me, a wave of cold, triumphant clarity. Brenda's driveway, for its final 325 feet before it met the public sidewalk, was trespassing on my property. For decades, every single time she or any previous owner of her house had driven to the street, they'd been illegally crossing a piece of land that now, legally and unequivocally, belonged to me. This was the aha moment. It was better than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't some minor bylaw infraction I'd found. It wasn't a loophole. It was a foundational fact of the land itself, a truth that had been lying dormant for decades, waiting for someone with the right tools and the right motivation to uncover it. Brenda had picked a fight over a 24-hour move-in window. I had just discovered a weapon that could control access to her home forever. The gears in my mind were turning, no longer fueled by anger, but by the clean, exhilarating hum of a complex problem finding an elegant, devastatingly effective solution. The discovery of the remainder parcel was the key, but a key is useless without a lock to turn. I couldn't just build a giant wall. The HOA CC and RS were explicit about fences and structures, requiring an architectural review committee's approval, a committee Brenda undoubtedly controlled. A direct, confrontational move would get bogged down in the very bureaucratic mire I wanted to avoid. The solution had to be subtle, unassailable, and, ideally, something that would look perfectly reasonable to the casual observer. The beauty of it, the true artistry, would be in its legal perfection. I spent the next evening poring over the HOA bylaws again, this time with a laser focus on one specific section, landscaping and grounds. I read it forwards and backwards. It had detailed rules about tree removal, lawn maintenance, and irrigation systems. It specified the approved species of hedges. But as I noted before, it was remarkably vague when it came to decorative garden features. It stated that permanent structures required approval, but movable planters and ornamental landscape enhancements did not. The ambiguity was my canvas. The plan began to crystallize. I would build a series of large, extremely heavy, movable planter boxes. They would be constructed from solid stone blocks, filled with tons of soil and rock, and planted with large, thorny shrubs. Individually, each one could be considered a movable planter connected together. They would form an impassable, knee-high wall. And I would place this beautiful new landscape feature entirely on my 325-foot wide strip of property, directly in front of Brenda's driveway. It would be an enhancement to my yard's curb appeal that just so happened to create a permanent, physical barrier she could not legally cross or remove. It was perfect. It used her own rules against her. Before I spent a dime, however, I needed to be absolutely certain. I was a surveyor, not a lawyer. I called up my old college roommate, Mark, who is now a partner at a prestigious law firm specializing in real estate law. I laid out the entire situation for him over the phone: Brenda's harassment, the police calls, my survey, the discovery of the remainder parcel, and my planter box plan. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, which was then broken by a slow, escalating chuckle that turned into a full-blown, wheezing laugh. "Alex, this is the most beautifully devious and legally sound act of petty revenge I've ever heard of," he said, catching his breath. "It's not even petty, it's genius. Let me see the documents." I emailed him the plat map, the deeds, my certified survey, and the relevant sections of the HOA bylaws. He called back 2 hours later. "It's airtight," he confirmed, his voice filled with professional admiration. "The plat map is the controlling legal document. The chain of title is clear. That land is yours. You have the absolute right to use and enjoy your property, as long as you don't violate any specific enforceable covenants. The movable planter loophole is brilliant. She can't define them as a fence because they aren't, and she can't call them a permanent structure if they are technically modular and not cemented to the ground. She will have no legal leg to stand on." He gave me one final piece of crucial advice. "Document everything," he warned. "Take pictures before, during, and after. Keep receipts. And when she confronts you, and she will, don't argue. Just state the facts calmly. Let her be the one who looks unhinged." My strategy was now complete. It was a three-pronged attack: unimpeachable survey data, a clever exploitation of her own rulebook, and a calm, factual demeanor that would paint her as the aggressor. Brenda was operating with the overconfidence of a dictator who believes her power is absolute. She was so focused on enforcing her petty rules that she never once considered that I might be operating on a completely different level, using a set of rules that superseded hers, the fundamental laws of property ownership. The next day, I placed the order for several tons of custom-cut limestone blocks, a mountain of planting soil, and a dozen mature barberry bushes, known for their dense foliage and wickedly sharp thorns. The delivery was scheduled for the following week. The war was about to move from the planning phase to execution. The day the materials arrived was a spectacle. A massive flatbed truck rumbled down our quiet suburban street and used its crane to deposit 2 enormous pallets onto my driveway. One pallet was stacked high with creamy white limestone blocks, each one a solid 2-foot cube. The other held a dozen enormous burlap-wrapped root balls of the aforementioned barberry bushes, along with about 20 large bags of premium topsoil. It was, by any measure, a significant landscaping project, and it did not go unnoticed. I had barely signed the delivery slip when Brenda's front door flew open. She marched across her lawn with a speed and purpose that would have impressed a drill sergeant. She didn't have her clipboard this time. The situation had clearly escalated beyond mere paperwork. "What is all this?" she demanded, gesturing at the mountain of materials with a sweep of her arm. Her tone implied I was building some sort of industrial fortification. I gave her my most pleasant, neighborly smile. "Good morning, Brenda. Just doing a little landscaping. The front of the yard looked a bit plain, you know. Thought I'd add a nice stone planter border. Really boost the curb appeal for the whole neighborhood." Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You can't just build a wall, Alex. Any structural modification requires approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I am the head of that committee, and I have received no such application from you." This was the moment I had rehearsed. I remained calm, even cheerful. "Oh, it's not a wall, Brenda. The bylaws are very specific about walls and fences. These are going to be a series of large decorative planter boxes, like a raised flower bed. Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the CC and RS says ornamental planters don't require pre-approval. I'm sure you know the 1-inch. I could see the internal conflict on her face. She was the expert on the rules, and I had just quoted them back to her. She was momentarily thrown off balance, but her innate suspicion quickly took over. "I'll be the judge of what constitutes a decorative planter," she said, her her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm putting you on notice. If this project violates any rule, I will have it torn down at your expense, and you'll be fined to the absolute maximum." She spun on her heel and marched back to her house. The threat was empty, and she probably knew it, but it was all she had. The tension was now a palpable thing on our street. The next morning, the contractor I'd hired, a burly man named Gus who specialized in stonework, arrived with his assistant. I had explained the project to Gus in meticulous detail, giving him a copy of my survey map with the 325-foot strip highlighted. He just grinned. "So you don't want these things moving? Ever?" "Got it." They worked with incredible speed and precision. They laid a deep gravel foundation, perfectly aligned within my property lines. Then, with a small crane, they began to set the heavy limestone blocks. Each block weighed nearly 400 pounds. They placed them side by side, forming a seamless, solid line about 2 feet high. The line ran from the shared property line between our lots, straight across the front of my yard, ending precisely on my driveway. The effect was immediate and dramatic. A low, elegant, and undeniably permanent-looking stone border was taking shape. Throughout the day, Brenda was a constant, menacing presence. She took pictures from her window. She made loud, pointed phone calls on her porch, undoubtedly to the HOA's lawyer and management company, complaining about the unauthorized construction next door. Several other neighbors stopped by, their curiosity piqued. To them, I was friendly and open, just adding some planters. I'd say with a smile, "Isn't the stone lovely?" Most of them, likely having had their own run-ins with Brenda, just nodded with knowing smirks and wished me luck. By the end of the second day, the stone structure was complete. It was beautiful, and it formed a perfect, impassable barrier directly in front of her garage doors, separated from her driveway by only a few inches of grass. All that was left was to fill them and plant the bushes. She hadn't figured out yet. She was so focused on the violation of building a wall that she hadn't yet processed the strategic placement. She thought I was in a battle over bylaws. She still didn't understand this was a battle over boundaries. The trap was built, baited, and ready to be sprung. The final phase of the operation was almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. On the third day, Gus and his team filled the long, contiguous stone box with gravel for drainage and then topped it with a rich, dark topsoil. It was no longer just a line of blocks. It was a planter, a very, very large and immovable planter, but a planter nonetheless. Finally, they planted the barberry bushes, spacing them evenly. With their deep green leaves, small red berries, and formidable thorns, they added a touch of natural beauty to my creation, a soft organic element to the hard stone and harder justice it represented. The project was complete. It looked magnificent. It was a tasteful, high-end landscaping feature that genuinely improved the look of my property. And it perfectly, completely, and utterly blocked Brenda's driveway. She couldn't pull out of her garage. She couldn't pull in. Her 2-car garage, home to her pristine Lexus sedan and her husband's oversized SUV, had been rendered utterly useless. The realization dawned on her not with a slow trickle, but with a volcanic eruption. I was watering my new bushes when I heard her garage door rumble open. A moment later, I heard it rumble shut. Then it opened again. Then a car horn blared, a long, frustrated blast. Finally, her side door burst open and she stormed out on her driveway, her face a thunderous shade of crimson. "What have you done?" she shrieked, the sound echoing in the quiet afternoon air. Her voice was no longer condescending or authoritative. It was the raw, ragged cry of someone who has just been utterly checkmated and knows it. "I can't get out. You've blocked my driveway." I turned off the hose, deliberately and slowly, and faced her. I had my folder of documents tucked under my arm, ready for this very moment. I kept my expression neutral, my voice calm. This was Mark's advice in action. Let her be the unhinged one. "I haven't touched your driveway, Brenda," I said, my tone maddeningly reasonable. "I've simply installed some landscaping on my own property. It's well within my rights." "Your property?" she sputtered, gesturing wildly at the planters. "My driveway goes to the street. You built a wall across my driveway. I'm calling the police." I'm calling my lawyer. I will have this torn down by sundown, and I will sue you for everything you have. I wouldn't recommend doing that, I said, my voice still level. Damaging my property would be a crime. And as for suing me, I think you'll find you don't have a case. The sheer confidence in my voice seemed to momentarily short-circuit her rage. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. How could I be so calm? How could I be so sure of myself? She was the one with the power, the clipboard, the rules. Her entire worldview was predicated on her own authority being absolute. My quiet defiance was something she couldn't process. Of course, the confusion was quickly replaced by more rage. "We'll see about that," she yelled, fumbling for her phone. "You've made a very powerful enemy today." She dialed 911, her voice trembling with fury as she told the dispatcher that her neighbor had illegally barricaded her into her home. I just stood there, waiting patiently. This was the moment everything had been building towards. The quiet research, the meticulous measurements, the careful planning. It was all about to pay off. The neighbors were starting to emerge from their homes, drawn by the shouting. A small audience was gathering. This was no longer a private dispute. Brenda, in her fury, was making it a public spectacle. It was exactly what I had hoped for. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the curtain was about to rise on the final act. The familiar sight of flashing red and blue lights once again graced our quiet suburban street. This time it wasn't just one patrol car, but two. Brenda had apparently dialed up the drama in her 911 call, probably using words like trapped and hostage. Behind the police cruisers, a white pickup truck with the city's official seal on the door pulled up. A man in a polo shirt with a code enforcement badge clipped to his belt got out. Brenda had brought in the cavalry. She met them on the sidewalk, a whirlwind of frantic energy. She pointed, she gestured, her voice a high-pitched torrent of accusations. "He did it overnight. He built this illegal barricade. I am trapped. He's harassing me. You have to make him tear it down. Arrest him," she wailed, playing the role of the damsel in distress to the hilt. Sergeant Miller, the same weary officer from my move-in day, was one of the responders. He saw me standing calmly by my new planters, and a look of profound resignation crossed his face. He clearly knew this was not going to be simple. He and the code enforcement officer, a man named Dave, walked over to me, leaving Brenda to continue her performance for the growing audience of neighbors. "Mr. Sterling," Sergeant Miller began, his tone professional but exhausted. "We have a complaint that you've illegally blocked your neighbor's driveway. Can you please explain what's going on here?" This was my moment, the culmination of all my work. I wasn't nervous. I was prepared. I held up the thick folder I was carrying. "Of course, officer," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It's a simple matter of property rights. There is no illegal barricade. What you see here is a new landscape feature, a series of planter boxes, which I have installed on my private property." I opened the folder. Inside, everything was neatly organized and tabbed. "Brenda," I called out, raising my voice so the entire audience of neighbors could hear clearly. "Perhaps you'd like to see this as well. Since you're the head of the HOA, you should be familiar with the official plat map for our subdivision." I pulled out the first document, a large, high-quality print of the original filed 1987 plat map, the legally binding document for the neighborhood. I then handed a second document to the code enforcement officer. "And this, sir, is a certified boundary survey I conducted myself last weekend. I'm a state-licensed surveyor. My survey confirms the measurements on the original plat." I used a pen to point to the relevant section on the map I was holding. I spoke loudly and deliberately, as if giving a presentation. "As you can see right here, when this subdivision was created, the developer failed to properly dedicate a section of land for the public right-of-way. There is a remainder parcel, a strip of land 325 feet wide, that runs along the entire frontage of my lot. According to the legally filed deed, which I have right here, I produced the next document. The ownership of that parcel was transferred with the property from every owner to the next. That strip of land belongs to me." I could feel the ripple of confusion and intrigue spreading through the onlookers. Brenda, who had been in the middle of another tirade, fell silent. The code enforcement officer Dave, was studying my survey, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sergeant Miller was watching me, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. I had changed the entire frame of the argument. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was about the bedrock of land ownership. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final, inescapable conclusion. My voice remained calm and factual, the voice of a professional stating irrefutable facts. Therefore, I continued, tracing the line on the map with my finger for all to see. My new planters are located entirely and completely on my own private property. Mrs. Henderson's driveway, as it was incorrectly constructed 30 years ago, ends 325 feet short of the public sidewalk and trespasses on my land. I have, in fact, been generous. I've only blocked access to what is legally my land. I have not asked for compensation for the decades of unauthorized use. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of neighbors. Brenda's face, which had been red with rage, was now draining of all color, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. She stammered, That's ridiculous. That's a lie. My driveway has been there for 30 years. The code enforcement officer, Dave, finally looked up. He had been cross-referencing my certified survey with the official records on his city-issued tablet. He looked at Sergeant Miller, then at Brenda, and then back at me. He let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be, he said, shaking his head in amazement. He's right. The county GIS is wrong. The original plat map and this certified survey confirm it. This 3-foot strip is part of his lot, not the public right-of-way. The words hit Brenda like a physical blow. Her entire case, her entire platform of absolute authority, crumbled to dust in that single public moment. The police couldn't help her. The city couldn't help her. The rules she had so viciously wielded were meaningless against the fundamental law of the land. Sergeant Miller turned to Brenda, his expression now devoid of any sympathy. Ma'am, this is a civil matter regarding a property line dispute. As it turns out, it appears Mr. Sterling is well within his rights. There is nothing we can do here. You cannot remove or damage these planters, as that would be destruction of private property. He then turned to me. Sir, as long as your landscaping doesn't obstruct the public sidewalk or street, you're not in violation of any city ordinance. You're clear with that. The officers tipped their hats and began walking back to their cars. The show was over. The power had shifted completely and irrevocably. Brenda stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. The neighbors were now murmuring amongst themselves, looking at Brenda not with fear or respect, but with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. She had been publicly exposed as a bully who didn't even know the boundaries of her own kingdom. She had called the authorities to vanquish her enemy, and instead, they had validated his position and confirmed her utter powerlessness. Humiliated, she turned without another word and retreated into her house, the sound of her door slamming shut echoing like the final gavel of a judgment. I stood there for a moment, looking at my beautiful, functional, and entirely legal planter boxes. They weren't just stone and dirt anymore. They were a landmark, a testament to the fact that knowledge is power, and that sometimes the most effective form of revenge isn't loud and explosive, but quiet, meticulous, and built on a foundation of solid rock and irrefutable truth. The aftermath was even more satisfying than the confrontation itself. The story of Brenda's public downfall spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The Battle of the Planter Boxes became a local legend. My immediate victory was that her Lexus and her husband's SUV were now prisoners in their own garage. For a week, they were forced to take Ubers or get rides from friends. Eventually, they hired a contractor to tear up a section of their pristine lawn and lay down a gravel path to the side of their house, a constant, ugly reminder of their defeat. But the consequences for Brenda went far beyond inconvenient parking. Her authority was shattered. The aura of intimidation she had cultivated for years evaporated overnight. People were no longer afraid of her violation notices and her threatening emails. She had been revealed as a petty tyrant whose power was built on a foundation of ignorance. A few weeks later, an emergency HOA meeting was called. It wasn't called by Brenda. It was forced by a petition signed by over 2/3 of the homeowners. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and it was packed. I attended, sitting quietly in the back, my folder of documents on my lap just in case. One by one, residents stood up and aired grievances against Brenda that had been simmering for years. Stories of absurd fines for holiday decorations being left up a day too long, of harassment over the color of mailbox flags, of costly demands to replant perfectly healthy flowers with approved species. My own conflict was the catalyst, the final proof that her reign was not just unpleasant, but incompetent. How could she be trusted to manage the community's bylaws when she didn't even know the legal boundaries of her own property? The climax of the meeting was a motion for a vote of no confidence in Brenda as HOA president. It passed with a nearly unanimous vote. She was stripped of her title and her position on the Architectural Review Committee. She sat through the entire proceeding in stony silence, a queen deposed in her own court. A new board was elected that night, composed of reasonable people who promised reform and a more neighborly approach. Their first official act was to formally rescind the $100 fine she had issued me on my first day. Peace settled over the neighborhood. The oppressive atmosphere of constant surveillance was gone. People started talking to each other more. The community felt like a community again, not a fiefdom. Brenda, predictably, put her house up for sale a few months later. I heard she had tried to sue me to gain an easement for her driveway. Mark, my lawyer friend, had sent her attorney a single letter outlining the legal precedent against her case and cheerfully informing him that we would be countersuing for all legal fees and for 35 years of retroactive trespassing damages. Her lawyer advised her to drop the case immediately. She couldn't sell the house with an active lawsuit and a blocked driveway, so she was forced to approach me, through her lawyer, offering to buy the 325-foot strip of land from me. I instructed Mark to send back a 1-sentence reply. My client is not interested in selling at any price. They ended up selling their house at a significant discount to a buyer who was willing to deal with the expense of completely reconfiguring the driveway. The day they moved out, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and watched the moving truck. Brenda never once made eye contact. The new neighbors who moved in are wonderful. The first thing they did was come over, introduce themselves, and thank me for the beautiful planter boxes the story had preceded me. My life is now exactly what I had hoped for when I bought this house. Quiet, peaceful, and blissfully free of petty tyrants. I learned a valuable lesson through all this. When you're confronted by a bully, you don't have to sink to their level. You don't have to fight with anger and emotion. The most powerful thing you can do is find the high ground, in my case, literally, and operate from a position of unassailable fact. Bullies rely on intimidation and bluster to create their own reality. The best way to defeat them is to drag them, kicking and screaming, into the real world, where facts matter more than feelings and rules apply to everyone, even them. My planter boxes are still there, of course. The barberry bushes have grown thick and lush. They serve as a beautiful, permanent reminder that you should never start a fight unless you've surveyed the terrain, and you should be very, very careful who you pick a fight with. You never know what unique skills they might be bringing to the battle. So I ask you, have you ever had to use your own quiet, specialized knowledge to win a fight that everyone else thought was impossible? It's a uniquely satisfying feeling, isn't it?